So my story with our commencement speaker goes back quite a few years. In fact, it goes back to when my children were very small. I remember it like it was yesterday, as a matter of fact. I believe my youngest, my son, was still too young to be at Green Meadow. And I remember exactly where it started. It was at Lions Park. And most of you probably know where that is, but it's a park in Jersey about 5 or 10 minutes away. And when my kids were small, we used to go there and play, probably a couple times a week in the good weather. And so we were down there playing, and we noticed that there was another family there playing with young children. And I don't remember a lot about what happened. The kids started playing together, and then the adults started playing together. And then there was introductions all around. But this moment is emblazoned in my memory. Our commencement speaker, when all the introductions came to her, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm Deborah Schaeffer." And for a moment, I thought she was going to stick out her hand and want me to shake it or something like that. It was an amazing thing. So we fast forward a couple of years, and she was a student here at Green Meadow. All of the colleagues that I spoke to about her, that taught her, all remember her as an excellent student, and of course, I do too. But there was something else about her I remember. She was a person who understood the substance of a situation that she was in almost immediately, even though nothing was said about it, inside the classroom or outside the classroom. And I don't think she was a big talker, but when she said something, it was clear that she had absorbed everything there was to absorb all the way to the periphery. So she left Green Meadow, an excellent student. She went on and got her bachelor's at Bowdoin College in biology and environmental science. And from there, she went to Pace University and got her master's in teaching. An excellent student again. Soon after that, we invited her here to teach. Mr. Henderson, who at the time was the biology teacher, took a sabbatical for a year, and we asked her to come here to teach. And she made a very good impression. She was an excellent teacher. So good, in fact, that a year later, when Mr. Henderson retired, we offered her the job to take over, to come here and teach long-term in the biology department. And this is where things get very interesting, because she was lured away from teaching at Green Meadow. Now, in this world, when someone with the kind of credentials in science and in math that she has gets lured away, it's usually to some place where there's a lot more money and often some kind of renown. But in her case, she was lured away, and I'm sure that's exactly the right phrase to use. She was lured away by the New York City Department of Education. Brooklyn, East Brooklyn to be specific, where she now teaches, and I suspect will teach for a long time. She teaches at East Brooklyn High School in a program for students who are struggling to graduate. So, it is with great pleasure I introduce our commencement speaker, Deborah Schaeffer.
Thank you, Michael. I have no memory of that initial introduction, but I'm sure it's true. It's wonderful to be here in this beautiful auditorium. When I graduated, we were in the gym. It's wonderful to hear the amazing, insightful words of these students. You know, Mr. Wittry joked about introducing me as a Nobel laureate, but as you can see, I bear one of the least prestigious titles in America of public school teacher. I've never been asked to speak at an event like this, so I'm very nervous. And despite Mr. Wilson's best efforts back in high school, I'm not a seasoned public speaker. I did remember one thing: don't start with So thank you, Mr. Wilson, if you're here. The fact is, I'm able to stand here for the same reason that all of you are sitting here. My Green Meadow teachers believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. They saw things in me that I couldn't see in myself. They nurtured the person I was becoming and helped set the groundwork for the person I eventually became. That is true to this very day. I am able to have the honor of speaking to you today because Mr. Witry and Ms. Chris believe that despite my lack of fancy credentials, I had a story that might be the right story for this class. Let's hope they were right. Today I'm going to tell you a story about how I found my path in life, or rather how I discovered about a year ago that I was already on that path and had been traveling on it since before I even graduated from Green Meadow back in 2001. That's right, unlike most graduation speakers, I learned my life lessons pretty much just in the nick of time to be able to relate them to you. So here goes. I've been lucky to live a life full of travel and adventure. I've stood before the Parthenon in Athens and the pyramids of Giza. I've climbed a fig tree with white-faced monkeys in Costa Rica and gone cage diving with great white sharks in South Africa. But the most impactful journey of my life was a 10-minute drive down that road right out there. That was where I encountered the other America. It was 10th grade and we were signing up for community service. I had always loved working with children and it happened that there was a placement working at a daycare center in downtown Spring Valley. I had no idea at the time, but this was where my life's work would begin. Think about that. Some of you have already begun your life's work and you might not even know it. I've thought back to my experience at that daycare center and tried to pinpoint what it was about those children that made such an impression on me. They were so exuberant and outgoing. They seemed to crave love and attention and were quick to reciprocate. I couldn't shake the feeling that these children really needed me. A few years later, my first year of college was drawing to a close. I needed a summer job, and the idea occurred to me to apply for a job at that daycare center. Well, not only did I get a job, but when the director found out I had some college education, she decided to put me in charge of the kindergarten classroom. There began the most stressful, exhausting, and life-changing summer of my life. The kindergarten children were exuberant, outgoing, and adorable. But many among them were also rambunctious, defiant, and volatile. They seemed to want and need so much from me. Despite feeling that I was completely in over my head, I tried everything I could to meet those needs. I brought books and toys from home. I created structures and routines. I yelled, I punished, I hugged, I rewarded, and then I went home and flopped on the couch in front of the TV, unable to move. On my last day of work, I threw a party for the children, who were on their best behavior. Then I got into my car and cried hysterically. I knew I had experienced something profound, but I didn't yet know what it all meant. Shortly after that summer, I came upon a book called Savage Inequalities by Jonathan Kozol. Kozol, a former public school teacher, compares schools in high and low-income neighborhoods. He describes children struggling to learn in crumbling buildings where teachers have limited resources and, even worse, limited belief in the children they serve. I know these children, I thought. It was at that moment that my affection for the children from the daycare center unfurled into a sense of outrage and the impulse to do something about it. Schools seemed like a natural place to start. So after college, I moved to New York City and found a series of jobs working with children from ages 3 to 13 in low-income neighborhoods from Harlem to Queens to the South Bronx. In every case, I felt that same sense of connection. These children also needed so much, and I was able to give them a lot. But too often, I didn't feel like I was making a lasting impact. After a couple of years, I felt it was time to take the next step and become a teacher. My first life lesson for you is that the right path in life doesn't always end up looking like you expected. My first public school teaching job fell into my lap thanks to a connection through our own Jennifer Brooks Quinn. The children at this school were just as much in need as any I had worked with before. The only problem was they weren't children. They were young adults aged 16 to 21. This was certainly not what I had had in mind when I first imagined myself teaching at an inner-city school. Furthermore, this school wasn't crumbling or devoid of hope. It was a warm and wonderful community staffed by caring and dedicated adults. Contrary to what movies about inner-city schools will have you believe, the best way to support young people in need is not to swoop in as a lone hero, but to work diligently in collaboration with others. The school I currently work at embodies that ideal to the fullest. East Brooklyn Community High School is a transfer school. This means we only accept students who are 16 and over with a history of low attendance and academic failure. For many people, this means I work with the most difficult teenagers in the city, and they can't imagine why on earth I would want to do this. But I like to say I work with gifted and talented students. They may not score high on standardized tests or be able to write the perfect college essay, but they are gifted and talented at overcoming adversity. They are gifted at navigating dangerous streets and a social scene that can leave you with more than emotional bruises. They are talented at sticking up for themselves and coming up with the perfect witty comeback. They are gifted with a deep knowledge of self and an absolute fearlessness about expressing that self. They are talented at bouncing back from the blows life lands on them, and those blows can be heavy. Family conflicts, loss, abuse, financial hardship, incarceration, unplanned pregnancy, violence. In light of all this, my students' ability to come to school and learn can sometimes seem heroic. But that doesn't mean I will cut them any slack, because one of the worst injustices they have had to face is the low expectations of a society that doesn't value or understand them, a society that would sooner blame, punish, and demonize than try to address the root causes of their struggles. In my view, the root cause has everything to do with inequality. Every morning, with my drive to school, I retrace that journey to the other America, crossing that invisible dividing line of race and class into neighborhoods where check-cashing spots outnumber banks, fast food places outnumber grocery stores, and unemployed outnumber college graduates, where minding your business isn't enough to avoid getting in a fight, and being innocent isn't enough to protect you from landing in jail. These are places of harsh realities. At the same time, they are places of vibrant culture, strong social ties, and amazing resilience. Young people grow up in these communities learning their norms, and then attend schools where they are forced to reject those norms and conform to an education system that was not designed for them. It's little wonder that many of my students view school as just another obstacle. I sometimes ask them, is going to school more like planting a garden or climbing a mountain? The majority choose the mountain. Maybe many of you would choose the mountain too. Right now, you are standing at a peak. And on June 26th, 65 of my students will reach that peak as well. Just like today, that event will be full of celebration and joy and hope. And just like you, these students will have more mountains to climb as they navigate their way into adulthood. For many of them, though, those mountains will be far steeper, with fewer paths to choose from and many more obstacles to overcome. Since I graduated from Green Meadow, there have been few obstacles in my own path. I had plenty of resources to smooth the way for me, and yet I've often wondered if I was on the right path. With everything I've learned about inequality, I've kept my eyes open for a path that would enable me to have a greater impact. I've often wondered, what is my real calling in life? Where is that summit I'm supposed to strive for, and how do I get there? About 3 years ago, I found myself wrestling with those questions. At that point, I had been teaching for several years. I found my work rewarding, but I didn't feel that I was having the substantial impact on the world that I had imagined. And I hadn't achieved the level of prestige that would, say, earn me the privilege of speaking at a graduation. Get it? Should I go back to graduate school, pursue a different career? That summer, amidst all of those questions, I went on vacation to Costa Rica with a friend. We were planning to stay in a little town on the coast for a whole month, and I figured I should do something productive while I'm there. I tried to arrange this elaborate volunteer project with local kids, but it ended up falling through. So there I was in Costa Rica for a month with nothing to do but hang out on the beach. I mean, what could be worse, right? Well, for me, this was a problem. I realized I had been in the mode of rushing from one ambitious plan to the next for so long that I didn't know how to just sit still anymore. But I had no choice but to sit still, relax, and start making the most of it. And I did start to relax and enjoy spending my time doing simple things that were healthy for me, thinking, reading, yoga. And best of all, I now had time to practice my surfing. I've gone surfing many times over the years, and let me tell you, it is not something I have a talent for. Whenever I see a wave coming, instead of getting right up on it, I freeze and usually either miss it or get up and immediately fall down. But I started taking out the board every day for at least 2 hours. I kept falling down, and I never really got the hang of surfing, but it felt really good to be out there in the ocean, feeling the exhilaration of grappling with those waves. After that month, I came back to New York City feeling healthy and invigorated. And lo and behold, something had shifted about my mindset. I no longer felt the need to keep looking for a new, more important or impressive path. It dawned on me that just like in Costa Rica, I could be satisfied with staying where I was, teaching at this school, making the most of it, and trusting that it would lead me to where I needed to be. It just so happened that this was the same year that one of my classmates from Green Meadow, Jessica Mansbach, gave me a book called Witnessing Whiteness that made me completely rethink my work. The author, Shelley Totchlook, who like me spent many years working in communities of color, examines the racist thought patterns that can lurk within even the most well-intentioned of minds. One of these patterns is called the white savior complex. When I first met these 12th graders, I introduced them to this idea by showing them a trailer from the film Dangerous Minds. They caught on immediately to the problematic nature of that narrative, which means they are already light years ahead of me and where I started. I went into teaching with the mindset that I would find some groundbreaking approach to education that would rescue my students and transform their lives, thereby reinforcing my sense of my own importance. Now I have left behind those pretensions, and instead I've embraced the idea that my work is not about imposing my vision on my students, but supporting them in realizing their own. Through this inner work, I've discovered another life lesson. If you want to change the world, you need to start with yourself. I realized that if I truly wanted to pursue social justice and equality, I needed to cultivate those ideas in my own mind and my own heart. That also meant facing my fears. I know that the main reason I am not able to catch waves when I surf is because of fear. The moment when I see that wave coming and I say, bring it on, that will be the moment when I start catching waves. Touchlick writes about how white guilt and fear can burden teachers like myself with feelings of pity and intimidation when it comes to our students. As students, I'm sure you know that a fearful teacher is usually not an effective teacher. I'd like to say I never felt intimidated by my students, but that would be a lie. Sometimes the force of their personalities and wills has felt like a big wave coming towards me that is sure to knock me over. In the end, I'm so grateful that I made the decision to stick with my work, because this past school year was the year that my fear evaporated and I started catching waves. Not in surfing, in teaching. I started innovating and honing my practice more fully, and things started clicking into place in my classroom. Those waves of conflict with my students suddenly became something that I looked forward to because I knew they could carry us to a better place. Let me give you an example. I had a particularly rambunctious class, and one day a student named Kevin was talking out of turn, and I raised my voice at him. He got very angry and told me he didn't at all like the way I was talking to him, and even his mother didn't speak to him that way. I retorted that a teacher who didn't care wouldn't bother to raise her voice at him. I was raising my voice because I cared that much. A few days later, a number of students were talking out of turn, and I was raising my voice at them, and I heard Kevin exclaim, more to himself than to anyone else, "Deb's got so much love in her heart." And he meant it, too. He really meant it. So, as you can see, my work at East Brooklyn Community High School does not resemble a Hollywood movie, and will probably never win me any fame or fortune. Most of the successes I've had in my career will only be marked within my own mind and heart, and hopefully within the minds and hearts of my students. On that day in class, Kevin saw my willingness to enter into conflict as love. What better accomplishment could there be than finally learning how to ride the waves of conflict to a place of love and respect? So this year, I was so grateful that I had decided to stay right where I was. I would have never realized how it felt to start catching those waves. I would have never discovered that my calling, my right path, was precisely the same path that I was already on. The following quote has been often misattributed to the Dalai Lama on Facebook, but I found out it's actually by David W. Orr, the renowned environmental studies professor from Oberlin College. The plain fact is, the planet doesn't need more successful people, but it does desperately need more peacemakers, healers, restorers, storytellers, and lovers of every kind. It needs people who live well in their places. It needs people of moral courage, willing to join the fight to make the world habitable and humane. And these qualities have little to do with success as our culture has defined it. As you sit here, poised to venture off on your own path, I encourage you to redefine success for yourselves. I encourage you to follow the path of inner transformation, first and foremost, before seeking to just leave your mark on the world. Because Orr is right. We live in a society where racial oppression and inequality are as prevalent as they were 50 years ago, but have taken on forms that are harder to see and harder to address. That means it will take individuals with the moral courage to look within themselves to create a more just society. And I know that you are a group of young people who possess that moral courage. I know this because last November, I had the opportunity to meet with you and talk to you about my work, and I was absolutely amazed by the thoughtfulness and depth of your questions. You showed a level of empathy and of insight that is rare to find even among the educators that I work with. You expressed a genuine interest in wanting to understand my work and my students. And even though you didn't get to know my students face to face, you will have many more such opportunities in your life. I hope you both seek out and take advantage of those opportunities. We have plenty of wonderful teachers, doctors, and social workers who work in marginalized communities, and by all means, I encourage you to pursue those career paths. But we also need more relationships and collaborations of all kinds that bridge the race and class divide. Because when you enter those relationships with a sense of awareness and respect and the commitment to challenge and work on yourself, I believe that is where a real spark of transformation can happen. A spark that could one day lead to the existence of one America for everyone. Michelle Alexander, the author of an incredibly important book called The New Jim Crow, says that the antidote to racial oppression is to, quote, cultivate an ethic of genuine care, compassion, and concern for every human being, of every class, race, and nationality. You are a class who has cultivated that ethic together, and I believe that each one of you has the capacity to cultivate it in your lives, no matter what path you take. That is why I believe Ms. Chris and Mr. Witry asked me to speak to you today, and I hope that you will take some lessons from my story that can help you along the way. Your path in life will be all your own, but at times you may experience some of the same things I have experienced since I was sitting in your place over a decade ago. Hard to believe. Sometimes you will feel like you are surfing in an ocean, battling the waves and struggling to find your balance. But if you think that struggle might have something important to teach you, I encourage you to stick with it until you start catching those waves. Sometimes you will feel like you are climbing a mountain. You will have to choose your path and have a destination in mind. And from time to time, just like right now, you will arrive at a lookout point where you can survey how far you've come and ponder where you will go next. But the journey will continue, and I don't believe there is ever an ultimate peak to be reached. You will have many paths to choose from, but you never know. The right path may just be the path you're already on. So, happy surfing, happy climbing, and my heartfelt congratulations to the Green Meadow class of 2014.